One of the main tasks for the Finnish Institute in Stockholm is to present Finnish culture and society to a broad audience in Stockholm and elsewhere in Sweden. In February this year, we started a special drive for Finnish design, architecture, and fashion. We would like to present the modern and the brave Finland, det modiga och moderna Finland. And the first exhibition was opened by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Erkki Tuomioja. And I think that modern and brave also apply to the plans for a new Guggenheim Museum in Helsinki. One part of our promotion work is also to inspire Swedes to visit Finland for cultural experiences, so-called cultural tourism. We knew already that a lot of Swedes are visiting Helsinki to see the ABBA musicals at the Swedish Theatre in Helsinki, but also to visit the museums. Thousands of Swedes have during the last years seen the exhibitions on Atheneum, Skärfbäck, Tove Jansson, and recently Jean Sibelius' exhibition, among them the Swedish Queen, by the way, a couple of weeks ago. And I'm sure that Guggenheim Museum also will attract a lot of Swedes to visit Helsinki. So a future Guggenheim Museum in Helsinki is not a matter only for the Finns and for the cultural life of Helsinki. It's a question of great interest and great importance also for neighboring cities as St. Petersburg, Tallinn, and not least for Stockholm. We are very happy that the Vice President of the Guggenheim Foundation, Ari Weissman, has come all the way from New York to tell us about the idea of a museum, and especially why just Helsinki was chosen. We will also hear representatives from the cultural life in Helsinki and also comments from the political point of view. It's also very nice to notice that among our participants today are many representatives from the museums and other cultural institutions in Stockholm. And I will already now ask you to think about questions for the concluding panel discussions. The first part of the seminar will be chaired by the Director General of Nationalmuseum, Bernt Arell, and the second session will be chaired by Rasmus Wern, architect at Vingårds Arkitekter. Between the first and the second session, you will have the possibility to get familiar with the six finalists in the architect competition, where 1,700 entries were participating. Once again, very welcome to the Finnish Institute and to this seminar, and I wish you an interesting afternoon. And now I will give the floor to Bernt Arell, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders, and most welcome also on my behalf. We will start with two entries. First, we invite Ari Weissman from New York Guggenheim to present the project, and after that Professor Laura Kolbe, member of City Council in Helsinki, will give the sort of remarks on the political view of how the project is handled in the city of Helsinki. We have agreed that we will take questions directly after the entries, and so I invite Ari to start, and then you can prepare for questions to Ari after his lecture. Welcome.
Okay. So again, thank you, Bernd, and thank you, Anders, for hosting this afternoon's discussion. There have been a number of discussions about this project that have taken place in Helsinki, in Finland, in New York. We've had a number of quiet conversations in Stockholm with colleagues who have been running institutions here about what this project could mean, ways in which we might be able to partner, and what a Guggenheim entry into the Nordics would mean. And so it's a great opportunity this afternoon to open up the conversation to more people and to continue this, this dialogue. I'd also like to thank the fellow, or my fellow speakers this afternoon who will respond to and complement and offer other points of view to ensure that we have a rich conversation with a number of ideas presented and shared. So thank you, Laura Kolbe, thank you, Susanna Pettersson, thank you, Carolina Kaiser, and Pia Savinen. And finally, thank you, Rasmus, for moderating our discussion later in the day. Let me take a step back here and let's there we go. Let's talk for a minute about what the Guggenheim is and what it stands for as an institution and what led us to Helsinki. The Guggenheim, as many of you may know, was started by an individual, by Solomon Guggenheim. Here he is. The museum was founded in 1937 after he had been collecting art privately. He, like many collectors in America in the early 20th century, was collecting the work of old masters. And it was not until he met an art advisor from Germany, an emigre who was living in New York, that he was introduced to the avant-garde paintings and artistic movements in Europe, most notably impacted and informed by Kandinsky. And so he avidly acquired the work of Kandinsky and other painters from the region, and amassed such a collection that he filled his apartment. This is a picture of his apartment at the Plaza Hotel in New York, and would occasionally open up his private quarters to visitors and interesting students and other artists to see this work that he was bringing and adding to his personal collection. Here you see a Kandinsky, one of the important Kandinskys that becomes part of the founding collection of the Guggenheim. What happens next is he decides that this is not enough, and it would be better to create a permanent museum. So what you have here is an image of the first iteration of the Guggenheim, which was called the Museum of Non-Objective Art. This is a picture from 1948 in on the current block where the Frank Lloyd Wright Museum exists. So from there, here is his art advisor with a big bright smile, Hilla Ribe, with of course Frank Lloyd Wright and Guggenheim looking at this model. The building design process began in 1943 and was completed in 1959. So I think from the very beginning, the Guggenheim as an institution is aware of the long path and the long timeline that is necessary for an institution to develop. Anyway, the museum opens in 1959 to great acclaim, and here we have, this is day one in New York, and the museum moves away from being the Museum of Non-Objective Art and becomes the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation. And at that point, the museum, with its first or second director after Hilla Ribe, begins collecting and looking at artists and work that is beyond simply or beyond the rubric of non-objective painting, and looks at painting and artistic practice in a much more holistic way, looking at European and American art initially, but then quickly moving on to the international artists and work as it's being made. So the Guggenheim, fortunately, in 1979, Solomon Guggenheim had I'd say not a close, and it's sometimes a competitive relationship with his niece. Peggy Guggenheim. And in 1979, shortly after she dies, she decides to bequeath her palazzo and collection to the foundation in New York. And here we have the Peggy Guggenheim collection, which then becomes an integral part of the Guggenheim. So from about 1980, the Guggenheim becomes an institution with a strong and initial presence in New York, but an international and a multi-sided institution, which was unusual at the time. And interestingly enough, from day one, though, in the 1930s, the foundation, the charter, and the original mission of the Guggenheim says that it would be a museum or museums. For some reason, and I don't know exactly why, there was always, or from the very beginning, this idea that in order to complete the mission of the institution, there would be potentially multiple sites. So Peggy's collection, as many of you know, has incredible strength in American and European post-war painting. And so this moves the collection outside of the initial founding mandate of Solomon Guggenheim's and moves it in a way forward and connects it more deeply to what's happening in America. Here, of course, is the wonderful palazzo with Picabia and Picasso. So then what happens next? So we're moving through this history very quickly, but I think it's important to just kind of lay out some important milestones that have that provide the logic for what we're doing here today. So in 1997, the incredible museum in Bilbao, Spain, opens, and this was a monumental project, and one that became, I'd say, more impactful and with greater resonance than anyone would have anticipated. It was a project, and continues to be a project, that is a collaborative project between the Basque region, between government leadership, the arts community, and the Guggenheim Foundation. To outline a bit of what this museum is and how it functions beyond the spectacular building by the American architect Frank Gehry, the Guggenheim Bilbao is a museum with its own collection. And as we talk more about what Helsinki could be like, there's a lot to be learned from the Bilbao experience. The Bilbao Museum has its own board, its own governing structure. The museum building is owned by the government of the Basque region. The Guggenheim has a role on the board, but the majority of the participants are from the Basque region. The collection is owned entirely by the Basque government as well. So the Guggenheim's role in this building from the very beginning, of course, in setting the artistic program, but also helping to define and selecting Frank Gehry and define the scale and scope of the institution, is to act as a partner, as to devise the program, to work on selecting an exhibition and acquisition program that is both complementary to what is happening within the Guggenheim world, but also that is locally relevant and specific to this museum. So there's also, of course, it's impossible to talk about Bilbao without talking about what others, to be clear, not the Guggenheim, have termed the Bilbao effect, and what is that effect, and what can we learn from that, and is there anything that's relevant to Helsinki? Are there pieces? Is it completely separate from the possibilities in Helsinki? These are all important questions for us to consider, and for Finland and others to consider. I think we are very clear in our minds that Bilbao is a distinct case, and so there are things to be learned from it, but but the Guggenheim is in no way interested in, nor does it even see it as being possible to take what's happened in Bilbao and presume that it's either A, appropriate, B, relevant, or C, even possible to do in Helsinki. But with that, I will say that the Guggenheim in Bilbao has had a tremendous impact on the economy, and that can't be doubted. The Guggenheim exists within and came about within a larger cultural and urban redevelopment plan in Bilbao, and continues to play an active role in the economy. As last analyzed by the government in 2011, the museum apparently brought in 42 million euros in tax and related revenue, and was responsible for 275 million euros in national GDP. They also associated close to 6,000 jobs directly and, of course, indirectly with the museum. So from Bilbao, of course, there were many suitors or interested cities that approached the Guggenheim. And here we have a fantastic site-specific commission and installation by Solowit in Bilbao. And we can talk more a little later about that collection and how it works. But moving ahead, so we can get to Helsinki, in 2008, the Guggenheim began a project with the Government and Investment Authority in Abu Dhabi to develop a museum there. And this museum is underway. Collection is being established, and the museum is moving ahead. I think it's important to recognize that for the Guggenheim, it's not only about building new museums. And so this introduction was based on architecture, but here what we have is a temporary project. This was a project that we did a few years ago called the BMW Guggenheim Lab, which was a project that moved to a number of cities, and it was in a way an open think tank. It was a public space that was created. Here, this is a temporary building built out of carbon fiber by Atelier Bow Wow, which was a Japanese firm. And here we see it in Berlin. Here it takes another shape in Mumbai. And this was a place that had lectures by artists, architects, as well as meditation classes, art making classes, cooking. I mean, really, it was a program that was devised in collaboration with outside participants and local artists and leaders. So. This is a bit of background bringing us to Helsinki. And this is a somewhat peculiar slide, but I think it's a good way to situate where Helsinki is relative to the other major activities for the Guggenheim. And what does it mean for the Guggenheim to call itself and to pretend to suggest that it's a global institution? And I think the DNA is in the institution from day one, looking beyond national borders, looking at and where the most radical art is happening and finding ways to share it with new audiences. It's also important to recognize that each Guggenheim museum is one part in a constellation of museums. And so the idea is that each museum is locally specific, that there are curators. The program is developed based on the immediate community, the larger region, and presents a point of view that is both locally relevant but also interesting to international audiences. Because the idea is that exhibitions and ideas may originate at one Guggenheim museum, but would travel and be shared at other museums. So let me take, just for example, we have two shows that have been up in New York in the last 6 months. One was a Japanese painter called V.S. Gaitonde, an Indian painter called V.S. Gaitonde. He's an important modernist painter in India. His work had not been shown in any significant capacity in New York. And it was through the research that my colleagues who are working on the Abu Dhabi collection building were doing and looking at modernism globally that Gaitonde really stood out as an important leading figure, and also one who had an interesting relationship to the Guggenheim's collection. Paul Klee, Kandinsky, and other abstract painters. So we organized an exhibition and presented it in New York earlier this year, and it was an amazing opportunity and a way to present art that maybe some of our other colleagues in New York who may not have the worldview or the exposure that we had based on the research and the activities that were necessary for the as part of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. Another example from that project, we just opened 2 weeks ago a show by Monir Farman-Farmian, who is an artist who is based in Tehran. She's in her early 90s, and again an artist who's not been presented in any significant way in New York, although she was working there in the 1960s and was in New York when the revolution broke out in Iran. And for us, this was also an opportunity to create an exhibition based on work that we had been acquiring for the Abu Dhabi collection, an artist who we got to know much better through that process, and allowed us to present work in New York to an audience that would most likely not have happened were it not for this constellation of ideas that are shared within the Guggenheim constellation and beyond. So I think that it brings us to Helsinki. And now I think it's important to look specifically at what this project is and how it came about. In 2009-10, the Guggenheim was approached by the city of Helsinki. I think this history is known by many people at this point, but the history has also been retold over and over again by different people and different parties. So I think let's just lay out some of the very specifics that led up to this moment. After receiving this invitation by the mayor of Helsinki, we decided that it was worth exploring, that Helsinki had many attributes that were relevant and would allow for an interesting evolution of the Guggenheim. And we also saw a potential partner from the very beginning. I think it's important also to note that the leadership in Helsinki from the very beginning understood what I was saying earlier about Bilbao. The Bilbao is not something that could or should happen in Helsinki, but that it was an opportunity to think differently about what a museum could be, and specifically what a museum in Helsinki could be. And so we, with a certain degree of skepticism, decided that the next logical step would be to spend a year doing a concept and feasibility study. And so we spent 2011 looking at everything from site to the existing landscape of cultural institutions in Helsinki, Finland, the Nordic region, to consider what would be appropriate and if there was even a need for another museum in Helsinki, and if so, what would be what would complement the existing institutions and be a potential successful collaborator. We of course also looked at the finances, at visitor numbers, to assess whether or not it was really a viable possibility and how we would go about moving forward. So here is the South Harbor in Helsinki. Here is the site that we landed on. We didn't land on this site in 2011. As many of you may know, the first site that was considered was directly opposite the current site where the white building is and the cruise ship is parked. Though after presenting the project at the end of 2011, the project was voted down by one vote within the executive council of the city, the executive board of the city council. And as I said, when we began the project in 2011, there was a great degree of skepticism. And at the conclusion of the project, we were convinced that this was something we really wanted to do, and that there was significant potential, and it was a project that could really make an enormous impact, both in Finland, but also in the world of museums. So we sat back, we heard a lot of the criticism, we licked our wounds, and decided, though, that there was enough support and commitment from colleagues and people in Finland that we shouldn't abandon the project. So we modified some of the financials, we modified the site, and we took the criticism to heart and came back with another proposal. And so it was at that time, this was now over a year ago, that we presented a revised proposal, and the city board approved moving ahead with an architectural competition to devise and think about what the building would be. Because in the first concept and feasibility study, we decided not to look at architecture. We felt that it was important to assess really what would the concept be, what kind of museum could this be, and not in a way be distracted by architecture as the rationale behind the project, but really ensure that the program and the identity of the museum would be what would propel it forward. So a bit about what that program would be. As I touched on, the idea is that the exhibition and the program would be specific to Helsinki. It would have its own staff. It would have its own curatorial team that would work in collaboration with curators in other parts of the Guggenheim world. That ideas would be generated, exhibitions would be created in Helsinki that would travel both within the Guggenheim constellation, but also outside to other museums that we have relationships with and that the Guggenheim Helsinki would have its own relationships with. It would also be a place for Guggenheim exhibitions that are produced elsewhere. So the two exhibitions that I had earlier mentioned could possibly have come to Helsinki. Other exhibitions from more historic ones, such as the Picasso Black and White show, or a show on Japanese avant-garde practice after World War II called Gutai. These are all examples of exhibitions that we could imagine traveling between Guggenheim institutions and would be relevant for an audience in Finland. In addition, we would also see this as an institution that is connected to the rich architectural and design history of Finland and of the region, Sweden included, and use it as a place to look at intersections between art and design. How are artists, how are designers working together today? How is the field changing? How are these boundaries breaking down? Also for the Guggenheim as an institution, there are certain limitations about what we can and can't do in New York City, given the specificity of the building there, given the schedule there, given the landscape and activities of other museums. So we see Helsinki as an opportunity to really think about innovative programming cross-disciplinarily. Of course, the importance of technology can't be understated in Finland, and the importance of the idea of innovation. So whether that's innovation in how a museum functions, whether it's innovation in how exhibitions are conceived, or how technology is deployed within a museum context, these are all very important elements in terms of how we could imagine structuring the institution. And finally, we see it as a place and an institution that would be driven by collaboration. So whether it's collaboration with existing institutions in Finland, in the region, and also a participant in the global museum world. Here is just a very attractive image of a James Turrell installation that was created in New York, and examples of very engaged children in one of our education programs, which of course would play a significant role in the museum program here. Now, these are some of the kind of pillars that I've outlined of what the program would be. Of course, it's important to recognize the museum program is always evolving. So there are fundamental values, but what will be on view in New York in 2018 or 19, I couldn't tell you today. And similarly, what would be on view in this museum, if and when it would fit within the broad outlines that I've articulated, but specifics will continue, would of course need to be determined later. Furthermore, the ideas that I put forth are our ideas that have been developed in collaboration and discussion, but that discussion has also expanded beyond professionals and official stakeholders. We've, over the last year, had about 10 different programs, a Guggenheim Helsinki Live program, and here's one that took place at the design fair, the Abitare fair in Helsinki, where an open public was invited to spend a few hours with us brainstorming ideas about what they thought would be relevant and engaging for a new museum in Helsinki. Here's another talk where I think we were talking specifically about design. This is at the Artec store in Helsinki and what role design could play. So that leads us to where we are today in the project, which is midway through phase 2 of an architecture competition. What you're looking at here is a stack of just a very small portion of the 1,700 entries that were received from architects. I think these numbers have been touted, but are very important. We structured an open, anonymous international competition, and this was working largely with the Finnish Association of Architects. I think it's an important example about sort of how the Guggenheim coming together with a local community and the local conventions can create something that is sort of beyond really expectation. And so through this competition, it drew unprecedented support and interest. And there were architects from over 77 countries who decided to spend their summer creating ideas. So the competition launched in June. These 1,700 entries were reviewed by a jury of 11 people. And here are 6. The jury's been led by Mark Wigley, who was the dean of Columbia University's architecture school. He's originally from New Zealand. He was joined by the director of city planning for Helsinki, Jeannie Gang, who's a very interesting architect based out of Chicago, doing projects internationally and has won a number of competitions herself and is working on a museum project at present. Juan Herreros, an architect practicing out of Madrid. Anssi Lassila, I'd say mid-career and very bright architect working in Finland. Erkki Lapavori, who comes out of and brings an engineering and technical expertise to the panel. Rainer Malamaki, an esteemed architect in Finland. Helena Saturi from the Ministry of the Environment. Of course, the environment, sustainability, and wood is an important element. What that means in the ultimate design is yet to be seen, but to do a project of this scale in Finland and not consider the place of natural resources would be impossible. My colleague Nancy Spector, who's the chief curator at the foundation in New York. Yoshi Takamoto from Atelier Bow Wow, who is, I think, one of the great thinkers in architecture today. He was responsible for the carbon fiber sort of floating lab that we presented in Berlin, and the deputy mayor in Helsinki. So that brings us to the 6 finalists. So over 4 days, through an incredibly methodical process, the jury looked at all 1,700. And for those of you who are scratching your head saying, did they really, and how did they do that, and how much coffee did they have to drink, and did they really look seriously? They did. It was not done with everyone sitting like you are looking at slides. A very intelligent process of dividing and putting the jurors together in teams prior to coming to Helsinki was devised and worked incredibly well. And then there was a kind of round robin where all of the teams of jurors looked at those that were promoted, those that were demoted. So there was a constant process of re-evaluation, and then a very engaged discussion once a short list internally was made, and these 6 finalists were selected. The architects come from around the world. The names of the 6 firms have been identified. This is a break with the conventional way in which SAFA, the Finnish architects, structure their competitions, but we thought it was very important for the architects, though they're not identified with their designs, but for people and to hear from the architects and allow them to share ideas about what they think a museum could be, what their response to Helsinki and Finland could be, and to architecture today. So the 6 firms are AGPS Architecture. They're based out of Zurich and Los Angeles. Asif Khan out of London. Fake Industries out of New York, Barcelona, and Sydney. They move around a lot. Haskug Zimmerich out of Stuttgart. Moreau Kusanowski out of Paris, and Smar Architects based in Madrid and Australia as well. I think there must be some Spanish-Australian nexus that we're learning about. Anyway, these architects all came to Helsinki in the middle of winter, which was probably the best time for them to come, since none of them are based none is based in the Nordics. And we had a site visit. They heard from city planners and from the leadership in Finland, and they also heard from me and from colleagues in New York about what a museum needs to do. I think a lot of architects, maybe even Frank Lloyd Wright from the beginning of the Guggenheim's history, come with incredibly creative ideas. And our job right now is to marry their creative ideas with the practical requirements of what ultimately a museum has to do on a daily basis. And so they shared many of their ideas with the public as well. Of course, not speaking specifically to their plans, but it allowed for, I think, a very exciting dialogue to take place. And now they are back in their studios, rethinking their designs, taking the feedback and advancing their ideas in such a way that when the jury reconvenes, they will be able to look and, well, gain a better sense of what these plans truly represent and what's possible. We look forward to sharing their phase 2 designs, which will include models and much, much more information than has been presented to date, in an exhibition at the Taidehalle, which will be up for approximately 3 weeks in Helsinki. And this will be a fairly developed exhibition where one is able to see not only models, but also how the museums would function and how many of their ideas have changed from the phase 1 submissions that were created with far less knowledge about the site, the specifics, the requirements of what this museum would be. So in June, we will announce the winning design, and from then we will re-engage in discussions with stakeholders and politicians and those who would be responsible and those who would partner with the Guggenheim to move this project forward. So I think that's about time, but maybe we have a few minutes for some questions before we move on to the next, to Laura.
Yes, please, we invite you to have a short series of questions with Ari. Thank you very much for your very informative lecture and giving also the background and the history of why you work in this way and why this concept is important for you. think that was essential to hear. Ari will, of course, be in the panel after the coffee break, so you can always return if you don't have questions right now, but please use the opportunity to ask him when he's here. Let's use the microphone so that everybody can hear.
Okay, thanks. This was very interesting, I think. But name of this of your lecture is why Helsinki? Why not Stockholm? Why not Copenhagen? Why not Oslo? I don't know if you ever answered the question why Helsinki.
Oh.
And is the city paying you money, or do you get some? Is there?
Well, the first began truly with an invitation, and the invitation came from Helsinki, not from Stockholm, to be perfectly blunt. But in looking at and responding to that invitation, we were intrigued by the possibilities, and I think I outlined some of the possibilities, but I can reiterate them. We saw potential partners both in the government and in other cultural institutions in Helsinki. The rich history of architecture and design in Helsinki proved to us that there was a community of people in a society that was open to and truly interested in art and ideas. Of course, one of the first metrics for understanding audience and visitorship within a museum is education, and the impressive educational system in Finland was was appealing to us, as well as a constant flow of visitors. So for any museum, and when we looked at the visitor numbers, one was visitors who would be local, and the other visitors coming from abroad, tourists and so forth. And the metrics and the analysis showed that a museum here could have about 50% visitors locally and 50% who are coming on cruise ships, who are coming from Russia. Of course, when the project was begun in 2011, the relationship with Russia was quite different from what it is today. And that's one of the first questions I get from people is, well, the situation's changed, what does that mean? And my answer is that this is a very long-term project, and so when the museum opens, it's completely unknown what relationships will be like, and furthermore, we see this museum as a project. In a way, we're the ones developing it, but it's really a project for the next generation. That's why many of the discussions that we've had about it have been with adolescents and with young people, asking them what they would see and want in an institution. So those are some of the reasons for Helsinki. It also, but we were talking earlier, the profile, the museum profile in Helsinki is very different from that of Stockholm. And so we really felt that there was a role and a place for, a role for the Guggenheim to play and a place to function as a partner with existing museums in Helsinki.
Do we have more questions? Yes, could we have the microphone first row?
It was a long time ago I was in Helsinki, but my impression was that there are a lot of old classical houses, but I don't know which building it will be now. But when I look on pictures over there, it's very big, very new. It's very different from houses around. So for me, it's very strange that so big modern building are among old classical houses.
We felt that it was important for the museum to be a purpose-built building, not to occupy an existing building. The other opportunity in Helsinki is the waterfront. The South Harbor is a spectacular site, and sadly, if I might say, much of the land right on the water is underdeveloped. It's a parking lot. There is emptiness between some of the terminal building and the market hall. A lot of it is used for very practical purposes to get goods between Sweden and Finland and other locations. But it is also, I think, a site that offers great opportunity for new architecture. You know, one of the mandates for the architects was to create a building that would complement and would coexist within the neoclassical landscape of buildings that sits just behind the site, and also function well and respond to the immediate site, which has a park behind it and the harbor in front of it. And so the conditions of the site, I think, have forced and informed a lot of the decisions that the architects have made.
Yes, Susanna, please.
Yes, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. I would like to ask you about the creation of the museum concept. You were referring to the brainstorming sessions and different talks and you know, mini seminars organized together with various groups in Helsinki and elsewhere. Which is, of course, it's a fantastic approach because you are using the participatory strategies in that sense. I would like to ask that what would be the key findings you will take on board from those discussions?
I think, you know, participation and what audience wants from a museum and from a museum experience is one that we all grapple with as professionals. And what, you know, what I found most surprising during my research is completely anecdotal, but in a session where we had brought together about 40 14, 15-year-olds and had a discussion about what they would want in this museum. And one of the issues that we had been grappling with was technology. And, well, young people want, you know, we need to make this so wired and whatever we think is appropriate, of course, today would be totally outdated in 2018, let alone 2025. And that is a separate kind of challenge for museums. However, what they said was, we want a place where we disconnect, where our iPhones don't work, where we're with our friends. They said, we don't have really many places to be with our friends. We can't go to bars, coffee houses are boring, and it's cold outside, so we can't hang out in the piazza like we could if we lived in Italy. And so for us, and one idea which I think will be very interesting to see how the architects take to heart in their next series of plans is a space where galleries are not divorced from or entirely separate from other forms of activity and social interaction. So where restaurant, where bar, where meeting hall, where discussion areas are integrated into the museum experience. I think there are few museums that do that well today. And many museums, as they're built today, are still based on, here's the gallery and here's where everything else happens. I mean, I think for me, the Louisiana, which is such a great example for many of us and a success, is effective in that way in combining the art viewing experience, looking at it holistically. So.
Thank you. And Ari Weissman will be here, of course, during the coffee break and in the panel. So I think we thank you now. We are running a little late in our schedule.
Great.
Thank you a lot.
Okay.
You'll be back.
Yes, I'll be back. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And now we invite Professor Laura Kolbe. She's a member of the Helsinki City Council, kommunstyrelsen. And she will give the view of, and of course answering why did Helsinki propose this project.
Oh dear, that sounds interesting. I was not prepared to tell about that. Ladies and gentlemen, very happy to be here and try to use my two hats. Namely, first I put the hat of being an urban historian, and I've done quite a lot of research on Helsinki, on its history, and the second hat is then to be a local politician as a kind of hobby within my work at the university. But of course this allows me to speak a little bit with perspective and open up the different kind of emotions that are linked, both when it comes to the city of Helsinki governance, as well as the feelings and emotions and debate landscape around Guggenheim. It's not born from the empty space. Let's see then. Well, to start with, that of course every city has its own narration and its own history, its own identity and its specific characters. And it's not by accident that we in Helsinki use this Russian imperial picture as a kind of iconic symbol of the city, because to be honest, Helsinki is a Russian provincial city, and that creates a very special historical narration, all the time activated within its context, and that is the sea context. But let's start with the picture which is very usual when you talk about urban planning, urban setting, urbanity, what cities are all about. Really, I'm trying to introduce you a little bit now the national and the local landscape, and let's see whether this functions. Yes, it does. To show you what is the kind of platform where Guggenheim hopefully one day will, so to say, land and start its activities. You can see already by the first vision that Helsinki certainly is a planned city. It's not a kind of romantic medieval European city. Our medieval romantic European city is here in Stockholm, which was the capital city of Finland for 600 years. So here we have the root, the history, the background for Finnishness. But Helsinki certainly is a planned city, and here comes the first underlining of what is essential in the city's history. It is a kind of artificial creation which is linked to tell the story of the Finnish state. You can see the state very much present at the Senate Square. It's not a bourgeoisie old town where the middle class or the burghers are present. On the contrary, it's the place and the platform where the state of Finland is present, with its Senate building, with its main Lutheran church, the Imperial University, and then the municipal concentration of cities' buildings. No city hall yet created. All are former imperial buildings, which today form the city's administration. And then you can see very clearly how the city starts to develop itself. The railway is essential in understanding how is linked with the landscape, with the countryside, and still the character of Helsinki is being a kind of venue for immigration. Train takes people from the countryside. They are educated to middle class and to urban city life through the educational institutions, of course by work as well. And how within a century, the working class area expands this rather bureaucratic and professional city into becoming truly a kind of political platform for multitude of ideas and ideologies. And here in the landscape, culture plays a certain but not a dominant role. Let's look about where the central cultural institutions are located. I'm going to show the picture soon. But anyhow, you can see university's central role, and then soon different kind of national and municipal museums are built all over the city, becoming partly landmarks of the area. We have, of course, the Imperial Helsinki, which was located at the harbour and at the Senate Square, and where the future Guggenheim will be placed. And then at the moment there is a vivid debate going on how the Republican city centre should look about, which is located at the railway station and the Töölönlahti Pay, where the independence most evident symbols are located, like the Parliament building and the National Museum of Finland, and where the logistics center, railway station and bus station are. This is still under the construction, the music hall, the Museum of Modern Art, Finlandia Hall, and the new opera are located. But still, and this clearly shows you the weakness of democratic planning. It's very slow. This area has been planned over 100 years, and it's still under construction because we are not really able to agree what kind of buildings should be placed. Now a decision is made to create the central library at this venue in between the Sanomaosakeyhtiö and music hall buildings. It took 89 years to make that decision, so there certainly is hope for Guggenheim as well. We know here in Scandinavia we share the same municipal politics tradition in Sweden and Finland, of course. The 600 years made it, and we know that municipal politics is very slow and very conservative, and that is one of the challenges in modern democratic development. But to locate a little bit and to show and open up, I think the first challenge when it comes to cultural politics is Finland, that it certainly is very national. And when you say national, you ask whether it's nationalistic. And that's something I'm going to talk about a little bit later. We have the director of Atheneum here. She probably can tell you more, Susanna Pettersson, about her institution. But anyhow, this is the landmark and a true symbol of 19th century willingness to create and to express the Finnish national art within the European context. When you walk here at Atheneum, you can see the European artists and the Latin description and a lot of European allegorical elements indicating that Finnish art is European art, and may it stay like that forever. And of course, not by surprise, this is the main art gallery for the national collection, usually or traditionally collected by private persons partly, so here we have a kind of public-private presence already within Atheneum, clearly showing the national dimension. Then the academic ethnographic interest is present in National Museum, which is going to have its 100th anniversary, I think next year, 2016, creation of Saarinen, Geselius, Lindgren, and you can see quite many elements well known from the Swedish past, and this again became a kind of iconic nationalist symbol of Finnish essence and presence, and historians were needed to tell the story of Finland. Not by accident, located in very close communication with the parliament building, opening up the northern line from Helsinki. Art and history being a kind of essential or essentialities within the state formation. And then we come to the local level. What kind of tradition does the city of Helsinki have as a kind of inventor of museums and art and cultural activities? Surprisingly, there is, of course, a tradition of City of Helsinki's collection. The main building of the Historical Museum, City of Helsinki, is located in the former private palais of Alexandra Karamzin, a kind of well-being lady with the Russian-Finnish roots, having a lot of money and leaving her essence and tradition present in this building. Also, we saw the public-private dimension in the art hall of Helsinki, created during 20s and 30s, and again a great willingness to be present within the European idea of how art must be present in capital city. And we have, of course, like all over the Western world, the private donators, the self-made men and sometimes ladies as well, like Amos Andersson, and his tradition of being a wealthy merchant kind of bourgeoisie and founding father of his own collection, now privately located in the city center. And Anderson Museum is at the moment also planning an extension or completely rebuilding of the museum. Premises also very challenging and interesting plan to go on. And again, Helsinki, being a typical modern and modernistic capital city, wants to underline that through its central institutions and cultural buildings, it takes its place within the international capital city's context, and you can't understand the role of Kiasma, the Museum of Modern Art, without understanding this national and nationalistic post-war debate, linking this kind of modernism and modern art into the Finnish modernist nationalism. It took several decades to build the building, designed by the American architect, which for the first time created a kind of very special and interesting and challenging tension in between the local architect's tradition and a so-called foreigner, alien foreigner, coming to destroy the national and nationalistic pride of architecture. It was very special and very particular, and even linked with the debate about Marshal Mannerheim, whose monument you can see over there, whether the Marshal really needs a modern museum, or should it be the blue-white landscape stretching back to Lapland, from where he, of course, marched into Helsinki. Anyhow, a lot of very funny anecdotes happened around linking the patriotic Marshal and the history of Finland into the Museum of Modern Art. I can tell some anecdotes as well, being member of Museum of Mannerheim at that time. Within city of Helsinki, you can see clearly that although there is a willingness to preserve the history and to create its own art collections, a kind of, and here you can see the municipal self-understanding that being a municipality within a capital city has meant that the national institutions played for a long time a more important role than the local ones. And it took a long time, many decades, before the city itself started to create its artistic identity and its artistic collections, and it happened by accident, more or less, to put the curves straight. A private donation, a collection, Bexbacka, was donated to the art museum, Helsingin Taidemuseo, the City Museum of Helsinki, being the heart of there. And the city was, so to say, forced to do something, that here we have a good collection, we have to do something, good grief, and we are not at all prepared financially to do it. And still, the Art Museum of Helsinki is kind of waiting its final solution. One phase has been to rebuild the former sports hall or tennis arena into a kind of multicultural building, typical building of 1990s, when culture, movies, popcorn, and Starbucks cafes were combined into a kind of center for leisure life. And museums, you can see that the city museums were located there, as well as part of the ethnographic collection from Museum of National Museum. And then during the last 20 years, we have seen similar development like everywhere in global or globalized cities. Old warehouses and harbors and logistical centers are transformed into modern urban centers, replanned and recreated as a kind of cultural institutions. And so happened within the Nokia industrial surroundings, quite close the city of Helsinki center, and there were gathered a collection of museums, Museum of Theatre, Photography, Hotel and Food Museum, to open up a kind of new cultural area where museums play an important and interesting role. Also, all these three museums are not municipal museums, but originally public-private enterprises. And then at the same time, during the last 20 years, a good amount of efforts to create private cultural institutions like the family Grünsteins Korjaamo, a former tram hall which houses the tram museum, as well as this private cultural institution, supported of course by the city of Helsinki. But anyhow, there is a kind of very active and partly successful, partly of course very challenging to create a new kind of arena and platform. So, well, we have already discussed, but let's now go into the municipal tradition in Helsinki. As I mentioned already, the political climate in Helsinki is fascinating and interesting, very challenging, partly rather conservative. And to understand really the emotional landscape in the city, you have to understand its self-understanding as a capital city. And I mentioned already that Helsinki is not an organic city created by wealthy merchants and middle classes like many European cities are. It's clearly a founded city, and just to say short that here are the two founding fathers. One is very well known here in Sweden, and the other quite actively present in Russia, namely the Emperor Alexander I after the Napoleonic War. Really put a lot of effort to create and recreate the spirit of Russian power in Helsinki. So it's a kind of royal and imperial city which now tries to create a kind of bridge in between the later developments as the middle class city and as the working class city. And here we have the tradition or the fundaments or the basement or the, let's say, the organic continuity when it comes to the municipal politics. Helsinki is definitely in hands here. We have the second Emperor Alexander II and the opening of his statue or the statue area 1890s in Helsinki being a kind of enormous manifestation of Finnish people, in this case everybody coming from the inland. But these two pictures symbolize the political basement in Helsinki. It has a very strong tradition of bourgeoisie tradition where the burghers or the bourgeoisie parties, the Swedish-speaking and Finnish-speaking, are not really burghers but persons linked to universities, to civil servant professions, and different kind of civic activism. And then we have, during the last 100 years, a very strong working class movement, Social Democratic Party being a very, very powerful element in the municipal politics. I think here we share the same experience like the Nordic capital cities. It's either the left wing or the right wing. And what happens in between is marginal phenomenon. We have the very strong basement. And here is interesting, of course, to follow up how this right-wing tradition and left-wing tradition react to a kind of plan which Guggenheim presents. Later on, a little bit more about that. I want to go back to the emotional landscape of Helsinki, what the city's self-understanding is all about. I would say the essential in understanding the spirit of Helsinki is linked with its identity of being a planned city. And this is one of my favorite pictures from early 1960s where the mayor, Lauri Aho, one of the leading intellectuals of his time, really, and this is a typical posé by the mayors, always like King Gustav Vasa, always in front of the map and indicating that that's something I would like to plan a little bit more over there. And usually and happily, I'm happy to say, the mayors have quite nice architects like Alvar Aalto, Eliel Saarinen, and several others, planning both the central and centrum area as well as some of the good suburbs of today. So here just to indicate how important the role of culture has been both during the imperial time and during the republican time in creating what the capital city and its self-understanding is all about. The fine, grand master plan of academician Alvar Aalto 1964, indicates that the row of iconic urban capital city constructions have a link to culture. Opera, library, theater, and different kind of main buildings open for public and being located very close to the Parliament House underline the importance of democratic people's political power. And then the Americanization of urban planning in Europe, namely the traffic enthusiasm, which was one of the reasons that Aalto's plan really failed when 68 movement didn't accept this kind of highways anymore. And you can see that the planned areas are always, I mean, Helsinki is a planned city and city planning is essential in its self-understanding. Now we are again in the phase where a lot of, as Ari Weisman already showed, that the former harbour, central harbour is now moved outside the city of Helsinki, and the former harbour areas, both on the west side and east side, are opened up now for urban planning and city planning, and this is where, of course, Guggenheim has its place and its challenge and its possibility. Helsinki is, as a planned capital city, a kind of symbol for European fashions. Helsinki has been St. Petersburg, it has been Paris, it has been Berlin, it has been Stockholm, and it has been a little bit New York also in the post-war period. Today, a part of Helsinki's self-understanding is to see itself as a kind of Neu-Berlin, be a kind of new Berlin, a kind of melting place for people, nice openings and gatherings, and create a kind of platform for people to meet, sell, buy, eat food, drink, listen to music, and be very spontaneous. Nice wish, but then comes the municipal, extremely conservative politics, and a typical phenomenon for Helsinki, namely the civil servant, who says no to all funny things. So there is really, I mean, it's really fascinating to see how this crisis of democracy is going on. And here I put the hat of urban historian on my head by saying that usually it takes approximately 10 years in Helsinki. If you say, let's do this now, then you have to wait 10 years. Now it happens. And I can see from my students and from young people that this 10 years is not enough anymore. We want to have the fun tomorrow. And there is a tiny revolution going on, and that's also why I think it's important for Guggenheim to reach the young people, because that's where the hope is. So Helsinki as Berlin wants to be a kind of open city where culture plays an important role, and where culture is present, and food is part of this culture, and meeting in between unknown people, this Simmelian idea of city as a platform is so essential in the self-understanding. And then comes Guggenheim. And how does it root itself into this very complex and very conservative landscape of political passions, the right wing, the strong right wing and the strong left wing, and the Green Party, which is also a major player in Helsinki today. And especially how this very locally and nationally rooted cultural life opens itself into the idea of having a Guggenheim museum in Helsinki. Surprisingly, or not maybe so not so big surprise, but politics, local and national, need a kind of dense phenomenon, which just happened to jump into the city council. Here we are, 85, sitting in the very modern and modernistic city hall. And it becomes a kind of layered idea of different kind of political opinions. And this is what Guggenheim, not really surprisingly, after 2 years of debate, you can really understand why it became a kind of microcosm of passionate political and cultural debate. Because it managed to break through many of the national and local conservative cliches on what culture and what art is all about. So this is a kind of setting. I mean, we had first the presentation of the ideas a couple of years ago, which completely recreated or opened a new kind of approach into what cultural life can be. The first step was to create a public-private pattern into a completely new march order. And that was the first tension, which was already created over there. And then we have, after that, had a lot of debate whether we should build, not build. It's a very, very ridiculous way of doing politics that media wants to get our opinion. What do we think about? Shall we do it public-private or only private or both? These kind of questionnaires were presented. Well, anyhow, we saw already the landscape, which is going to create a lot of debate, I'm convinced about, knowing my historian fellows and knowing the elite who takes care of the cultural landscape. This is, of course, a kind of a holy, horizontal, iconic idea of what Helsinki is all about, linked with the sea. And what happens here is to it creates emotions. What kind of building is going to be located there? It's just easy to understand that. Let's go over here. So the public-private was the first issue. And of course, when it comes to municipal politics, we know here in Scandinavia, it's all about sharing the taxation money. That's what politics is about at the local level. We are funded by taxpayers and how we use the taxpayers' money. And that's where the politics come in. So the first dimension in Guggenheim was to discuss the money. From where? By whom? And this kind of typical populism was linked, I think, very typical for the local politics, with the cost of one Guggenheim. I mean, as a kind of measure element, one Guggenheim. You can get 375 villas or one family houses. It's 1 year earning for this amount of persons, cars, Taima, traveling to Taima, touristic trips to Taima, Thailand, and cows, the amount of cows. Well, please, not in urban surrounding, at least the cows. Well, and to conclude a little bit, why Guggenheim became a kind of dense emotional landscape in the Finnish debate and Finnish discussion. First of all, Finland and Helsinki have been before the time of globalization, a very national country, national and nationalistic country. We have probably here many friends of Finland and Finnish culture, and people with the roots in Finland know that the whole ethos of Finland is based on survival fight, and that creates a kind of very strong nationalism and nationalistic approach. And this nationalism is also present in municipal politics. The good part is a kind of self-understanding and proudness that municipal politics takes care of everything. And there is, of course, a very strong left wing, the social democratic influence. That municipality is a kind of totalitarian structure that takes care of all of us. We know that welfare state discussion. And that means also that the part of this welfare discourse has been that it's also independent when it comes to culture. The culture must be in hands of local people. It's a very narrow way of looking. It's a local patriotism, partly, but local prideness on the other hand. So we all the time have these two aspects. It's a good part, good side, and not so interesting, or not opening up into wide scenes. Then still you can see very clearly the traditional left, I mean the social democratic tradition and the left-wing tradition. And here comes maybe the main division line when it comes to Guggenheim discussion. The right-wing politicians traditionally are very comfortable in the idea that city is a narrow economical unity, and let's take the private players. It's good if the cultural institutions are either national or private. I mean, it's not our task within the municipality to take care of issues like culture. Let's the private players play with that kind of. Whereas the left-wing politicians traditionally consider that it's extremely important that municipality takes care of the culture because of the democratic and the people's power position. It has to be owned by the public. So this is very clearly to be seen how the traditional left, and here you can see that the Green Party, which is so powerful in Helsinki, is divided between the traditional left and between the traditional right. They are not really linked to either of these blocks. And local politics is all about money, so you can't avoid debating what it costs, who is going to pay, what is the role of the state, what is the role of the local private funding, and what is the role of municipal funding. And at the moment, in time of economic crisis, this is going to be one of the key questions. If the private funding is all right, then why not? Very important, as a historian of idea, I have followed how the discussion has a kind of very strong element of the good old 60s generations anti-Americanism, which of course in Europe has its strong roots in Cold War period, but still if you look at the public debate, the strongest voices, unfortunately, come from the 60s and 70s generation, the generation who is very strong in their public appearance, who is very strong in pronouncing what they think all about, and who is very strong in controlling also the media debate. And by accident, and I'm very sorry that that happened, that this phalanx or block in the society managed to get the first step when the discussion about Guggenheim started. So in my opinion, Guggenheim is going to be the last fight, true fight, for the 60s generation, and they are not willing to lose it. I can assure you. We have several war experiences, and the last veterans from 68 generation, they are going to live until 110 years and fight against all evil American phenomena. It's very ridiculous, but it's very emotional. And of course you have to understand the particular landscape and position where Finland is located. And of course I know Sweden very well, so the anti-Americanism is very strongly rooted here as well. So you can see by looking at people's reaction what kind of, emotional roots come when Guggenheim becomes not what it is all about, but it becomes symbol of something. And this role of being symbol for evil things from 60s and 70s and from the Cold War period and American imperialism and capitalism and whatever, we all remember those nice, funny and dangerous slogans from our youth. And then Helsinki and Finland both are battlefields, probably eternally. It's quite classical, and everywhere we have a kind of division between the modernists and those who are open up into international influences, and those who are cultural conservatives, that conservatism can be political, mental, cultural, you can define it in very ways. And here is essentially an understanding really the roots in local surrounding. And then we come into the final point that architect and architecture and the architects really play an important role in defining what Finland is all about. And of course Helsinki as a planned city is a kind of creation of architects, and we need and we have used the great architects as a kind of symbolic elements in defining what the city life and city planning is all about. So it's very important who the architect is and how he's going to take place in the local discussion, and how his person is available also when the Guggenheim debate goes on. So with these words, I hopefully have opened up a little bit the very complex, very challenging, and very interesting platform Helsinki forms, both when it comes to urban planning and city formation, but also when it comes to emotional landscape, feelings, politics, debate traditions, and many other aspects which are abstract but present in the background when culture is discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, for this interesting presentation. And we do realize that this is not going to be an easy task for the Helsinki politicians. Now we will have a coffee break. We continue here at 3:15, so the coffee break will be a little bit shorter.
Beg your pardon. Before the panel discussion, I would like to give the word to Susanna Pettersson, Head of Atheneum in Helsinki. Please, welcome.
Yes, thank you. And it's really great to see so many of you here. Perhaps a couple of words about my background before I go into the topic, because I'm wearing, as Professor Laura Kolbe was referring to, 2 hats. I might have the same situation here. I'm not only the director of the Atheneum Art Museum, but also working a lot with museology, teaching museology in the Netherlands and Finland as a young professor. And therefore, when looking into this topic today, I use those both perspectives. First, some one-liners, quotations from the past. Yeah? Yeah? Why? Okay. Just a minute. I'll just check first. Is this better? Okay, here we go. So, going to one-liners from the past. Too expensive. Wrong place. Timing is not right. And the whole concept sucks. And now I just wonder that what might be the case. Would it be Guggenheim? Actually not. It's Atheneum. When I was writing my PhD on the early collection history of the Finnish Art Society, which forms the core collection for the National Gallery, which is housed mainly at the Atheneum building, those were the arguments that were widely presented in the press against the initiative, against Atheneum as a concept, as a building, as a site, as a museum. And quite interestingly, if we look at the discussion, well, the culture field and the discussion then, there were certain elements that I would like to pinpoint here. First of all, the new concept. The Atheneum concept consisting of the idea of combining fine arts, de fria konsterna, and arts and crafts together under the same roof. And that was all too modern, it was all too radical, and it was absolutely too far from the ideas of the artists had of a way of organizing museum activities in the country. The biggest problem was that the so-called true artists did not want to see them located under the same roof with those who made arts and crafts. Very interesting discussion there. Well, the concept included not only showing collections of the Finnish Art Society and the Society of Arts and Crafts, but also housing 2 art schools. So what was created at the time was a building for exploring the arts from many perspectives and also creating art. And that was also reflected in the architecture as Professor Kolbe was referring to earlier, because actually the art program, the trends of the time were manifested in the building by indicating who was who at the time of creation of arts and crafts and architecture. The founders, the early museum men, the founders of the initiative, did lots of what I call here with contemporary terms, market analysis, diving into the themes of industrialism, how through the aid of arts and crafts, Finland as a country could flourish better. It was certainly linked to nationalism. It was linked to the themes of culture defining the nation. And quite surprisingly, when you study the writings around the topic, very much linked to the tourism. One thought that once Helsinki would have a proper place for the arts to be displayed, the travelers from all over the country and also elsewhere would find their way to Helsinki. Okay, this was the discussion then. It continued as such, very polarized opinions, huge public debate. It went on and on and on. It was not a matter of 1 year or 2 years. As Laura said, it was a matter of lengthy period of time. The first ideas related to the Athenaeum initiative were expressed in early 1870s, and the building was ready in 1887, more than 10 years. Lots of fears, hopes and expectations to this direction. So, if we now look at the museum field now, it's all about new concepts, market analyses, polarized opinions, public debate, fears, hopes and expectations. What I have been especially happy about during the past years after the Guggenheim initiative was first launched is that we have never ever discussed so much about museums as during these years. And that's a very, very strong message to the surrounding society. Museums really matter. And they cause reactions, feelings, ideas. They make us think and talk and think about the importance of such memory organizations as museums, archives and libraries, as makers and formers of our identity. Of course, it's also linked to the future, very much so, especially in the case of Guggenheim, which sort of forces us to think that what's relevant now, what's contemporary, what's the way forward. And personally, I love that. I think it's brilliant. Helsinki as a city has lots of potential as a city of culture and as a city of very strong museums. As we saw the sites, and this is sort of very nice division of labor. Laura Kolbe showed all the nice pictures, and I show you the list of names of the places. Strong museums, wonderful museums, and so much potential for cooperation. Helsinki Art Museum is certainly the city's crown jewelry in that way. It's going to be relaunched and opened in September this year with a new concept, with a new director, who's my predecessor, Maija Tanninen-Mattila, who did wonders at the Athenaeum, and we can expect that she does the same for this Helsinki City Art Museum. Amos Anderson Art Museum is going to it's going to build whole new premises in the heart of Helsinki, will be opened in a couple of years' time. Kiasma just opened its door after being renovated last week. Athenaeum, we have also a renovation going on at the moment, and we can open the premises in the beginning of next year so that we have all the floors in use, etc., etc. Lots and lots of potential there. And Helsinki as a city of museums and city of culture is of course a city of people, because all these exhibitions, all the collection resources, all the public programs we can provide through these museums are targeted for the audiences. And that's something we should never ever forget. The museums are for the people. Without the people, they would be storages. So whenever thinking about the museums, we think of people. We think about individuals. We think about our members, the audiences, whether they are young or old. And this potential should be used, as I have written here, in a very innovative way. And I'm sure that all of the museums in Helsinki welcome the debate, going around and exploring the new ways to interact with the community around. And the potential should be used for the benefit of the audiences. I also gathered here some of the points that are very, very crucial for the museum field of today. There's a typo there. It should be cultural field. In terms of culture field and culture industries, museums need to understand their own status and profile in terms of the regional importance, national relevance, and also international. Why this is important? Because not all the museums need to be international by character. That would be silly. But they can be really, really important either regionally or nationally. And all of these three types of museums are certainly needed: regional, national, and international brands. In terms of political environment, of course the list could be longer, but I chose one topic which is extremely important as we speak. There will be an election in Finland, and what I'm following personally is that house culture is, let's say, used or addressed in the political debate. What is the status? What is the position of culture? Very important for all of us who work within the cultural industries, which is, by the way, one of the thriving industries. If you look at, for instance, the European Union stats and compare that, which are the fields which provide new places to work for people, and which are the industries that are going down. In terms of economy, public versus private funding, very important issue. In many countries, not only in Finland, the public funding is under a magnifying glass. For instance, in the Netherlands, during the past years, the public funding of the museum sector has decreased 20%, resulting in a situation where museums have been closed and some of them have been combined. Denmark, another example of solutions that bring lots of cultural stakeholders together to thrive. And in terms of technology, all the issues related to open data, accessibility, making collection resources available for the largest possible publics, very, very relevant, important. I'm not going to start lecturing here because I promised to keep this as a comment. But a couple of thoughts before I finish my commentary presentation. I strongly believe that museums really can change life. They can provide life-changing experiences, and we should understand that every museum is different. And that's the richness of it. It applies to Helsinki, it applies to Stockholm, it applies to all cities with strong, rich museum scenery. And thinking about the members of the audience again, everyone, as I have written here, definitely have a right to meaningful participation in the life and work of museums. And therefore, for instance, when I earlier asked Ari that what was the participation strategy in terms of developing the concept for Guggenheim, that's exactly how museums need to work nowadays in terms of succeeding. One feature in the contemporary way to run museums is, of course, that audiences are creators as well as consumers of knowledge. And we should, better than ever before, take the members of the audience on board, listen to them, work with them, give them a chance to participate to the, let's say, for instance, programming At the Ateneo, we are just about to start a youth panel, which will be a huge adventure. We have no idea where it leads to, but we welcome the members, the youngest audiences from 13 to 24 or 23 to participate to the planning processes. Let's see what happens. And effective museums engage, certainly, with contemporary issues. Okay, some question perhaps for the further debate. We should be aware of at least these issues here: museum as a concept, as a space, how do we use collection resources, what is the concept for exhibitions, public programs, and one of my favorite topics, social and political responsibility. We have to earn our sort of place and status in the society and the community every single day. We have to focus on the museum experience, and in order to get the best out of it, 4 words and then I finish. Clarity. Very important. We have to be very clear on what we do. We have to focus. What's the core of the activities? We have to be really responsible of what we do. And in terms of looking into the future, looking at the future potential of the Helsinki as city of museums, welcoming certainly Guggenheim, we have to work together. Because what I strongly believe is that the more we do things together, the stronger we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's not only very interesting, but it was also 15 minutes sharp.
Okay.
Then I would like to give the word to Carolina Kaiser, City Architect of Stockholm. Please welcome.
But I'll start to say thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm asked to comment on your plans for your Guggenheim project in Helsinki, and it reminds me very much on the discussions we have here in Stockholm. I was the member of the jury for the Nobelhuset, the new Nobel Center that's planned in Stockholm. That's not finally discussed. It's now out on public hearing, that project. And I'll show you some pictures that you probably will recognize in one sense. I just have a few pictures. I actually wrote down my comment, so I'm going to take the liberty to read to you. So, of course, the city of Stockholm has high ambitions when it comes to incorporating new architecture and high-quality construction into the city of today. It could be discussed that a Guggenheim project in Stockholm and an architectural competition for a new platform in Stockholm could contribute to knowledge and realization of relevant, innovative, sustainable, or even temporary architecture. The city of Stockholm wants to create a permissive environment for additions of qualitative and innovative architecture in both buildings and public space. Understanding that innovative architecture can help improving experience of the city as a whole. Stockholm is, as Helsinki, a beautiful city, rich in history and heritage. Managing Stockholm's historical assets is a central part of planning for the city's development. As knowledge grows, the view on valuable heritage has broadened to a more inclusive point of view. Experience has finally shown that it is possible to make relevant architectural additions without losing, rather increasing, unique values. When identity and existing values are considering starting point for developing a new product or project. Stockholm is also a city on water. Testing different strategies for design could give the city important knowledge on how to incorporate urban life into the waterfront space and buildings, and how to develop future activities to the watercourses. Stockholm's history of preservation is taking clear steps forward to a relevant development based on knowledge and future activity. So there we start. Here we go. Thanks a lot. So I'll just take you through the first pictures. In Stockholm, we have a new architectural strategy, and we talk about three things: innovative architecture, green architecture, and art and temporary architecture as means to activate the urban realm. So we see new projects in our historical city as actually a motor for this. And I could congratulate Helsinki as a city for having this competition with 1,700 projects handed in from architects throughout the world, and also to the discussion that seems to be very vivid and clear in Helsinki, as it is has been here also for the about the Nobel and other new projects in Stockholm. Discussing these themes, that actually is the one thing that moves us forward in our planning in our cities, and it also moves the self perspective on our cities to a new point that's relevant not only for us but for the future to come. So I'm sort of mixed up with the pictures, but it doesn't matter. City planning in Stockholm puts the citizen first. Stockholm is one of Europe's fastest growing cities. All new building projects have to answer to how they improve the public realm, as well as how they and in what way they improve the city as a whole. The day when demolishing existing buildings as a normal procedure for renewal have finally passed. In the 50s and 60s, we pulled down many of our historic parts of Stockholm city, and we replaced the homes of 33,000 people with modern office and shopping spaces. Planning was more about traffic, and the streets were drained with people. The human passages were underground tunnels, putting it sharply. Today, only 3,000 people live in the same area of Klara, the central Stockholm. These changes started an important citizen movement that stopped further demolition here after the Stockholm city planning changed. So that seems very alike your 60s generation in Helsinki talking about what is not able to change in your city. But Stockholm has, of course, a great history of iconic buildings and architectural gems, such as Riddarholmskyrkan at Riddarholmen, the Asplund Library, the Woodland Cemetery, and our heritage of wooden architecture. A truly iconic building has to earn its status and can hardly be built as such. Our building, Kulturhuset, was built in the 70s by one of our best architects, Peter Sällan. It became iconic when the public took it into their hearts, and it still is. Stockholm takes high-quality architecture very seriously, but the first question cannot be form or style. It has to be function and content, and how this adds quality to the community as a whole. Quality shows how this is housed with sustainability and beauty. We will follow our Helsinki neighbor carefully, and also our own project for a new building for Nobel. Of course, we hope both these projects will be taken in by the public and eventually become the iconic buildings that you strive for. But even more architectural care has to be taken in our city for the everyday architecture of schools and housing. So that was my comment. And I just brought a few pictures from the competition we had on Nobel. And in the first round, we had projects that really remind me of what we have seen in Helsinki in your competition today. So this was very sincerely discussed by our city. And there were, and this was a building that reached out 90 meters into our sacred water room. Lene Tranberg, our Danish architect, she made an archipelago within the archipelago. And the winning project that is now in public hearing is the Nobelhuset by David Chipperfield, a sort of city-like concept compared to the Nobel spheres. So good luck and thank you very much.
So, please stay here, Carolina, and I would like to ask the other persons that have participated here today, and as well Pia Sievinen from the Checkpoint Helsinki, an organization. But you could say some words about the organization you represent.
Yes, we are a very young art organization, actually founded and inspired by Guggenheim discussion and project in Helsinki. We are 2 years old. Our focus is on contemporary art, emerging contemporary art. And we are a kind of new generation art organization, if I can say so. We don't have a building, so we are producing contemporary art with emerging international curators and artists, and then we bring these artworks as a part of Helsinki. We are also collaborating with the established art organizations and museums in Helsinki, and we have a kind of experimental way to do things. We represent very different view if we compare us to, for example, Guggenheim or Atheneum museums that Susanna takes care of. Thank you.
Okay, fine, thank you. Please take a microphone, and I would like to, when everybody's getting set here, I would like to start with session with some questions or some fast answers, perhaps from the Guggenheim Foundation. We have all seen now, have a possibility to see these proposals here. I have 5 juxtapositions here that I would like you to respond to. Do you think that this proposal, the new Guggenheim to be in Helsinki, should be interpreted as a building that expresses creation or reflection on art?
Is it, hello, am I working here? How's that?
Yeah.
Great. Does it have to be either or?
Either or, yeah.
Well, I would argue that it's both, right? A good museum is a place where both can happen. So
do you want it to express a global community or a local community?
Again, not to take the easy answer, because I think it's actually the more difficult answer, or the more difficult proposition that we set for ourselves, but it really should be both. The Guggenheim is a global organization, but in these, throughout the constellation, the challenge, but the ideal, is to be both locally responsive and connected internationally.
Okay, do you want it to be a palace for the arts or a playhouse for the arts?
There I would say somewhere in between, right in between.
Right in between. Do you want it to be ephemerical or a statement, a permanent statement, or
a permanent statement as opposed to
or something ephemerical, something?
Oh, ephemeral.
Thin as air.
You know, I think it should allow for the ephemeral, but I think it should also be a frame or a framework or a platform that endures for artistic practices as they evolve.
All right, and finally, do you want it to be an emblem for the Guggenheim or an emblem for Helsinki?
First Helsinki, second Guggenheim.
All right. I can imagine that you had a tough job finding the right proposal. I would like to open up for questions now from the audience here, please. And a microphone, we can pass that over. That's a very good question. Laura, could you please come up here as well? Then we can share a microphone then. So please come up. Yes.
Yeah, I have three very short questions. The first one was, our American friends started by saying that he was approached by the city of Helsinki, to start a museum in Helsinki, and subsequently that was voted down. So my question then is, what was the mandate of the person or persons who approached Guggenheim in the first place? Because since it was voted down subsequently. The second one is, in the discussion about Guggenheim in Helsinki, was the Bilbao experience discussed at all? Was it considered relevant or whatever? Was it seen as an example? And the third question is to Ms. Pettersson, who presented, I think, a very rosy scenario with her solidarity among different museums, because in most cases, whether it's the national or the city government, they have a limited budget for culture. Now, if you set up a new museum, it costs to build, it will also cost to run. If you have a limited budget, sooner or later it may go at the expense of the existing museums. So I would just like to have a comment on that. Thank you.
So I will start. The initial invitation came from the mayor, and that was a quiet conversation to see if we, the Guggenheim, would be interested in moving forward and what that might look like and what process would make sense. And when we proposed the idea of engaging and performing a concept and development study, that was then brought to the city council, and Professor Kolbe was on the council at the time, so she can maybe speak to the discussion that took place then, but there was approval to move forward with the analysis phase, with the understanding that at the completion of the analysis, then there would be more information for the council to assess and then make a vote about moving forward to the next stage in the development process. So that is why we saw kind of one step forward and then a step back and then a move forward to do the architecture competition. But again, that's a finite approval. The site that we looked at has been reserved by the city for a period of 2 years. So approximately 1 year to do the competition and another year to keep it on ice while the conversation about what to do next takes place. In terms of Bilbao, of course the city leadership and the mayor was intrigued by Bilbao, and there's a lot to be learned by Bilbao. But I would credit him and other leaders with the wisdom to recognize that Helsinki offered a place to do something new and different, and really not to recreate Bilbao. Many people that come to the Guggenheim come with the idea that, well, it worked in Bilbao, won't it work in, Santiago, Chile, or any number of cities, and usually when we say no, that's kind of the end of the conversation. But there was really the openness to think about what could be possible. As I said, there's certain things that have worked in the Bilbao structure. The governance structure is one that could be applicable. The ownership relationship between building, collection, and so forth could be applicable, and also the programming balance between local and international colleagues is one that we think could be applicable. In terms of the economic impact, that is a study, and that has, those numbers have been proposed by Boston Consulting and third-party people who are much better at looking at these things than we are as a cultural organization.
Just shortly to explain how the decision-making goes on, that in cases like Guggenheim, it's the civil servants who make the suggestion and who start with the negotiations. Politicians don't make that in Helsinki. It's a very clear division. Civil servants make the negotiations, they come with a proposal, which is then politically discussed and analyzed within the political bodies. But unfortunately, I have to say that within the first phase of debating politically Guggenheim, it was linked with the extremely narrow-minded local party political decision-making process, where the elements were not nice, clear, and beautiful, because it was a kind of extremely complex internal party politics affair, which was reflected in the first phase of Guggenheim. Very ugly municipal politics at its extreme way of doing it. So, but it's really essentially an understanding that mayor is a civil servant, although he has a political background, and political decision-making discusses based on civil servants' suggestions. So politicians couldn't take contact with Guggenheim, although we would have probably maybe liked it, but it doesn't work like that. It's very clear division of labor.
Susanna, the answer to the third question
Yes.
concerning the finance?
Concerning the financing, well, I start from National Gallery perspective, which has to do with the idea that we certainly welcome all the debate which is related to funding issues of culture and culture field at large. And in this particular case, there's been huge debate on the combination of public and private funding, which is immensely important for the self-understanding of the culture field and how it works and how it can be financed, etc., etc. So I would say that the Guggenheim initiative has made people more aware of the sustainable long-term solutions, the possibilities of them. It has opened up the added value effect in terms of what culture can bring to not only to the city of Helsinki, but Finland at large, and also a cost awareness, because it, as you said, you're absolutely right. It costs lots of money to run these sites, and there has to be solutions for them. But I would see that the whole discussion has ended up in a situation where people are in general more aware of the price tag that comes with culture. But that's a positive thing.
Perhaps, Pia, you could comment as well on this aspect of funding. I mean, in what sense do these money that this museum will cost, because it's a matter of cost, will that gain Helsinki culture, or could it be gained better in other ways?
I think, and we at Checkpoint Helsinki have been thinking that, or we would prefer if the money would be private, but and it's very interesting that Guggenheim has also started a stronger discussion regarding the private funding. For example, a couple of days ago, there was in Helsingin Sanomat, which is our, Helsingin Sanomat, an interview of this American investor, Cham Katzman.
Yes.
Yes, who's going to invest or invest private money. He's going to would be a private investor to Guggenheim Helsinki. I think that is really interesting. Guggenheim can be a good example of having also larger or in a bigger scale private funding, not only in the form of foundations, but also to have more private investors in Helsinki and Finland. So we have been thinking that it would be ideal to, if Guggenheim would have private funding, but maybe the ideal would be that we have public funding to all the good projects, all the amazing museums we have in Helsinki, and then new generation art organizations maybe like ours, and let's see what happens.
Thank you. I didn't see any hands in the air right now, so I take the opportunity to address. Oh, yeah. Stuart Vrede, please.
Yes, well, this issue of funding has come up a few speakers, and it's still very unclear to me what the model will be. One talks about public-private funding. Now, this was something new. I hadn't heard that there might be a foreign donor to the museum in Helsinki, which sounds wonderful. But Laura, you are a politician. What is the discussion in Helsinki about how this will be funded? I assume the lot will be provided by the city, but who will build the building, who will keep it going, and so on?
Well, so far the situation is following that the city has promised or make a reservation for the place where the museum probably will be located at the harbor area. But the financing model is still under discussion, and the political debate has to do quite a lot of who is funding, under what kind of circumstances, what is the role of the state going to be, is the Minister of Education participating at all? That depends, of course, very much of the minister. What is his or her position? Where is she or he politically located? Is it a very left wing or a very right wing? And there is a lot of emotions and strong ideas linked to that. And then, of course, the public-private is a big issue. Are we going to get, because this is really and truly a new opening within the local political field. We don't have had the tradition of private funding within the municipality. So that's where the tension is, but that's also where the possibilities are. So it's still, we don't know yet. As politicians, we haven't had the final calculation yet, because it depends so much on the result of the competition and how the public fundraiser, there is a group or a society, how successful will they be, what is their amount of collected money, etc. So it's still under planning, but quite a lot of depends on how this public-private is going to look like.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to add on to that point, so as you referred to, a foundation was established in Finland last year, a Finnish-based foundation, which has been a way for local enthusiasts for the project to connect and also to raise money. This is all pledged and pending public support for the project, but a way to coalesce and to make a statement that there is private interest in moving the project forward.
There are striking similarities between the two projects, the Nobel Center and the Guggenheim Museum, but also a very striking difference, and that is that the Nobel Center is to express something which we think of as a national pride, the Nobel Prize and the foundation, whereas the Guggenheim in a way represent this Americanization and international culture and something that one could at least call foreign element, an alien and an invasion of the United States. Well, do you, Carolina, think that it helps, and or rather, what importance do you think it has for Stockholm that this big project that now will take place in the very center of the city has this kind of background, that it's in an institution of great national pride? Would it ever have been possible to establish a Guggenheim on that lot?
Could you tell us what is going to be there in the Nobel building? What's the role of that?
Very, very good question.
Because it's somehow essential in understanding the context.
It's the Nobel Foundation wants...
You hear her?
Ja, nej, men då tar vi den här. Nu är jag trött på den här. So the Nobel Foundation wants a new building where they can hand out the prize, but also where they can give lectures and where they can house their museum that they have housed in one of our older city palaces. And so they have been scattered all over Stockholm, and Stockholmers in general haven't thought that was a bad thing, because Stockholm is used as a base for the Nobel discussion, which is beneficial in very many ways. But of course, when the Nobel Foundation wants to reassemble and actually wants this place where you can have discussions not only within the city but also external and global, if you want. That is one of the wishes. And of course, in the city, we're not actual spokesmen for the Nobel Foundation, but this is the wish that they have presented. So it's sort of a meeting point. But it has been questioned. What do they really want to do there? And meet with whom? And it's said that all the pupils of Sweden will visit at least once when they pass through school, and the Stockholm pupils will pass at every stage, and it will be sort of a meeting point for science, knowledge, literature, and anything else connected to the Nobel, and also, of course, architecture, since the building has been architecture has been one of the issues. What can architecture bring to a meeting point at this site?
And what if you think about the possibility to establish a Guggenheim on that lot, theoretically?
Or vice versa, we take the Nobel and...
Yeah, but I think that lot, the place, the very prominent place in Stockholm has sort of been saved for a issue, or for a program that will where the public meets culture in some sense. So it has been seen as a public place. Of course, historically it was a national museum that had this as an expansion spot, an area, and then it was sort of in the inner parts of Stockholm, but now it's going to be reconnected again with a new subway system, so it's actually going to be a very central place and reachable for all around the city. I think we would have seen a similar, but not the same, discussion on content, privacy, and what... I actually think we are more alike in Stockholm and Helsinki than we talk about. So I think the discussion would have been very similar, and I actually think it is. And the question of sort of foreigners invading, we have that discussion here as well, and it's a strange discussion because we're already a city that belongs to the global community, and we're not at all apart from that in any way. So for me, it's and as an architect, it's very difficult to understand that fear of invaders, since we're already sort of blended as it is. And if a Guggenheim project would be possible in Stockholm, I don't know, because that's actually a political question and a question for the people to answer. But if the project could be processed, I think definitely.
If I then reverse the question and address Helsinki and the Guggenheim, do you think that this building will have a possibility to actually change attitudes in terms of being part of the global community in Helsinki, which has been founded there, Finland, in the very corner of Europe, and now in changed geography, hopefully, being rather a center spot, and that a building like the Guggenheim could actually changed attitudes to the city. Will Helsinki be another city in the eyes of the people in Finland and in the eyes of the world after Helsinki? Anyone?
Maybe I'll jump in as someone who's been thinking about Helsinki a lot. One of the reasons that the Guggenheim was quite interested in Helsinki was the fact that it is at such an interesting geopolitical location, and that after many centuries of being somewhat isolated, now sees itself and has the potential and is much more connected than it once was, whether it's through Finnair and Helsinki being en route to Asia and being one of the largest carriers between the West and the East, the possibility for diverse and different audiences. Also, through many of the conversations that I had with people, there was it was often stated how Finland was quite proud to be part of the EU and a real and sees itself moving forward. And much of the discussion was about the future of Finland, the future, where it's going, and how it can be better connected with other parts of the world. And so for us, it really provided the entree, and the at the time seemed like a genuine, open, broad willingness to welcome the Guggenheim as an outsider. That changed when many of the political issues that were discussed in the debate and so on heated up. But from our perspective, from the beginning, we felt a very warm and open embrace as an outsider.
I think this has partly to do with the generational idea that talking with young people, I think you have done it already quite a lot at schools and universities. Young people think that there is no problem whatsoever, that in their minds, Finland is already, and they see themselves as a part of global culture, entertainment culture. And Guggenheim is just, a natural extension of that, whereas we who are born in the 40s, 50s, maybe early 60s are still rooted in the Cold War period and see the landscape is completely different. And if you look at the iconic buildings in Helsinki, Atheneum links us to Europe and European art heritage. Then the next remarkable public building is called Finlandia Hall, which is the municipal house, maybe symbolizing President Kekkonen's life and work in between the East and West. And then Guggenheim has a very strong symbolic meaning again. And I think the situation, or where the European politics is going on, where again the East and the West and the Russian Western presence in Finnish politics is maybe tensed up again, can benefit. The Finland's willingness to show up again the so-called Western history and Western culture, Western mentality. So probably, let's not hope for the Third World War, but here we have a possibility to fill up the notion of Guggenheim Museum with positive, let's say, Western ideas and Western influences when it comes to culture and education and design and the role of citizens, which is, so to say, there behind the surface, and very positive values. So the world political change and the dramatic situation can really also benefit, I think, politically, the discussion of role and culture.
Can I, just pick up from there, because I think one very, very important feature in this discussion is that not only about the building, the walls, the character of the building, but also the concept, that what it actually represents as a museum, because the possibilities there to build the museum of the future in a way, which is, as I showed to you earlier today, when I flew here this morning, I was leafing through this book here, which is Museum of the Future, a wonderful collection of lots of interviews where artists and museum directors try to make the best out of, answering the questions of what is the museum of the future. And there are several answers to that. But I think this is prime time, let's say, to think and talk about those issues, which are very, very relevant for the future audiences.
Meaning young people of today.
Thank you.
Professor Kolbe was stating that one of the reasons for the criticism is this anti-Americanism, and somehow I can't understand that argument in a way, and I would like to hear you sort of give an analyze how that argument has been so popular in Helsinki, because out of an American perspective, Guggenheim is very, very European. It's one of the most European sort of institutions on the US art scene. So I can feel that it's a very anti-intellectual argument, and though it has been very, very popular, obviously. But may I make another question as well? Since Susanna Pettersson was talking about how important it is with together, I think it's very important. I would like to ask the representative from Checkpoint Helsinki, in your organization, since you have been heavily publicly funded as a protest movement you have got from the Ministry of Culture and from the municipality of Helsinki, a lot of funding. We haven't seen that much result yet, but it would be nice to know how you are going to work together with the Guggenheim Helsinki project.
We haven't discussed that yet in details, but we are, for example, organizing some, or actually we have some plans. We are going to do something together in Helsinki. We haven't been like exactly how to collaborate with Guggenheim, as it doesn't exist in Helsinki yet. But of course, as we are working with the National Museum and maybe other museums in Helsinki too, maybe, I wouldn't see why Guggenheim couldn't be our collaborator or partner. Maybe it has been as I mentioned, how Checkpoint Helsinki was established. It was like we wouldn't exist without Guggenheim Helsinki or Guggenheim. So it's thanks to Guggenheim we are alive. Maybe it's more, as you mentioned, maybe it was the that we our founders or our funding comes. Our funding is public funding, and this year, for example, it comes from the city of Helsinki, and then the foundation of the Kone Foundation. Maybe it's more the media who raises the this kind of ideas of Checkpoint to be against Guggenheim. We are a different alternative and representing something. Maybe I would say we are like younger generations art institution or organization, and open for. I think there is space for many museums from Guggenheim to the other institutions. And the richer the art scene in Helsinki is, the better it is for everyone.
So, if there aren't any more questions here, I would like to... Yes?
Didn't Leif had a first question, which... Yeah, I'd like to hear the answer to that.
Because it certainly is a great paradox in trying to understand how the mental layer is located within the people who see Guggenheim as a kind of threat. Because I fully agree, and I wrote in Helsingin Sanomat an article or public opinion article about really exactly what you are saying, that Guggenheim is a creator of European modernist collection, and if we have the possibility to get the European modern art into Helsinki, why are we blaming? But you know, and you're a historian as well, so you know that it's not that simple as it looks, and really how Guggenheim became a kind of symbol for those kind of feelings is linked with the Finnish weird nationalism the Finnish left created during the 60s and 70s, where all foreign elements were considered to be a kind of threat. And the anti-Americanism was very strong. It was the war of Vietnam, and it was many other Cold War phenomena which created the mental mapping within the Finnish intellectuals at the same time as they looked Hollywood movies and had the jeans on and ate popcorn and drank Coca-Cola. So it's something which you cannot rationally explain. But it can be used as a political tool in this kind of discussion, and I think really of many of my colleagues at the university and intellectuals who are so strong in their belief that this is a kind of threat, and I don't know how to work and manipulate that idea, because it's so complex and it's so paradox in many ways, but it's existing there as a kind of European idea and identity which you have to understand.
Well, with these words, I would like to thank you all, thank the audience, and thank all the people who had taken part in the discussion. And I think that we can look forward to going to see wonderful exhibitions in how many years?
Well, the first one's in 1 month, so please come to Helsinki to see the exhibition at the Taidehala. There will also be an expanded website, so if you're not able to make it to Helsinki, there will be lots of information about these buildings and where the designs are heading. So that is in April. When the next exhibition will be is a bigger question that I can't quite answer.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.